My name is Sowmya Tanguturi, and I will be reading my story, Rosie's Big Weekend. So this is Rosie's Big Weekend. It was Friday again. So Rosie sat at the class librarian's desk and checked the records to see if any of her classmates had any overdue books. As she was doing so, her best friend Rachel walked up to her to borrow another book. Rosie was about to help Rachel check out the book when her teacher, Mrs. Goldberg, said, Rosie, I'm afraid you have to go home early. Your parents are here to pick you up. Mrs. Goldberg, I will not skip today. Who'll do my job? How will I earn my bucks? Rosie, you have to go. I'll figure out something, but please go. I said I don't want to. This is my job. Tell my parents to pick me up later. Rosie, Mrs. Goldberg said, go now, while I'll walk you down there. No, I will just go, Rosie said with a frown on her face. Rosie, go, or you will have to quit a few, or you will have to quit your job for a few weeks. A few weeks? No, Rosie said as she stormed out of the room. As Rosie stormed down the hallway, on her way to the main office, a teacher came out of the room. Please walk quietly. We're taking a test, or I will have to send you down to the principal's office. I'm sorry. I'll walk a little quieter. Minutes later, as Rosie walked into the office, she saw her mother sitting in a chair. She was dressed in a semi-formal dress and wore lipstick and mascara today. And she also had a full face of makeup on. Today must be a really important day, Rosie thought. Maybe we'll be visiting someone this weekend? Rosie waited for her mom to say something, but she said nothing. Maybe, Rosie thought, I got in trouble for something? Rosie, we have to go. No, you go, I'll stay right here. Rosie, please, just come, her mom begged. No, Rosie said confidently. I'm going now, her mom said as she began to leave the school. As Rosie's mom began leaving the school, Rosie did not. Rosie sat as still as a statue. Her mom tapped her on the shoulder, trying to get Rosie to leave. Rosie crossed her arms and sat as if she was waiting for something, but felt her mom drag her out of the room. Rosie tried everything she could do to stay at school, to not leave early. But somehow, Rosie's mom managed to drag her out of the school. Rosie stood in front of the building quietly and marched to the car. Rosie, you're going to meet your twin, her mom said. My twin? Mom, are you blabbering something? I don't understand what's happening. Is this a prank? Rosie, no, this is not a prank. You have a sister and you're going to meet her today. Where is she? In the adoption center. We're going to pick her up. Mom, why did you put my sister up for adoption? I did not. Why did you do this to me? To us. Rosie, her mom said as tears rolled down her cheeks. You, uh, us, adopted. Mom, did I hear you correctly? I'm afraid I didn't understand you due to your stuttering. Rosie, you were adopted. Her mom replied without stuttering. That's what I said. Mom, why did you not tell me? Answer me. Rosie, this is not how you behave, her mom scolded her. You are not behaving like this in front of your sister. Mom, why? Why did you not tell me before? Rosie, let's talk over this. Let's talk about this over lunch. It's too much we're doing at you. As the car came to a halt, Rosie could not feel the hot mac and cheese burning her tongue, which was surprising given the fact she always has that feeling when she came here. Even when she was in the car, she could feel her mouth watering, smell the food, and hear the waiters and waitresses taking orders. She could see the busy restaurant, but today she did not feel the vibe. It was not a busy day. As Rosie walked in, the smell of her favorite mac and cheese disappeared, and instead of the usual day, it was a really quiet day in the restaurant. without people chattering in the background. Rosie wasn't sitting at the edge of her seat, waiting for her letter to be taken as was her instinct. Don't think this will make up for adopting her. Rosie, we're adopting her and we're not making up for this. Mom. Rosie was sitting with her parents, eating lunch as the only child, with all attention given to her. This has always been Rosie's favorite restaurant, because every time she comes here, Rosie gets to order her favorite dessert, butterscotch pastry. But now, Rosie's afraid she will no longer be able to because her parents will think it's too expensive to let her order a pastry. Mom, why are you telling me now? Rosie, you are my daughter, not biologically, but genetically, her mom told her. Huh? Your parents are like twins. We all are identical twins, like you and your sister. Mom, why are you telling me this now? Rosie demanded. Rosie, your real parents wanted to tell you this, but now they're too busy traveling that we have to tell you. Mom, Rosie exclaimed. So just because you guys and my parents are identical twins, you thought you could replace my parents, Rosie? Rosie, her mom raised an eyebrow. No one is replacing your parents. Now that you are done with your lunch, let's meet your sister. Rosie wanted to do whatever she could to stay the only sibling, to be who she knew she was. Rosie's parents wanted Rosie to know her real life. Rosie didn't remember what it was like being adopted, so she didn't know what her sister was going through. Rosie was, of course, excited to meet her sister, but she couldn't. Rosie was Rosie wanted to know about his real life and know more about her sister. She did deep inside, but the feeling that she might be ignored and replaced prevented her from doing so. So she thought that maybe she could walk around as if she was looking to have another sibling. Maybe that would convince her parents she wanted her old life back. She wanted it to be just the three of them, what she always thought her reality was. Rosie wandered around the adoption center, trying to understand her sister's life and to trick her parents into thinking they should leave now. As Rosie wandered, she saw lots of children who were sitting in the adoption center, looking really sad. As she saw these children, she wondered how her sister felt staying here. Thinking about her sister made her wonder how she felt while she was here. Her mom wondered. Her mom found her wandering and said, "Rosie, you should meet your sister." Why? "Rosie, please," her mom said. "Come meet your sister." "Oh!" Rosie groaned. "Whatever." Rosie went to meet her sister. When Rosie saw her sister, she realized that the style is so similar, and they are literally wearing similar outfits. Then Rosie felt like she was sent an individual, and that she wasn't able to feel like she was herself. Instead, she was a total stranger. "Hey, Rosie," Rosie's sister said. "Who are you, stranger?" "Ruby, sorry about that. It's nice to meet you. I'm your mom." Okay, Jas. Okay, Aunt Jasmine. Ruby, please, you can call me mom. I'll introduce you to your dad. You go talk to him for a while. Okay, mom. Rosie's mom took Ruby to her dad. When Rosie's mom came back, she said, "Rosie, be kind to your sister. Rosie, make sure she feels at home." "Mom, how can I tell my friends I have a twin? That my twin is identical?" "Rosie," her mom replied strictly, "that's no excuse to call her a stranger." "Mom, that's what she is. Your sister is a stranger?" "Yes, so are my biological parents." "Rosie, your sister is going to share a room with you." "Mom," Rosie exclaimed, "I have the right to know this ahead of time." As Rosie was talking to her mom, she realized that since her parents were trying to redo her room to be shared with Ruby, her parents did not let her go to her room. Rosie's parents told her she could only have half of her closet. She was asked to split her room in half. She did everything that was asked of her without knowing the reason behind it. "Whatever, I honestly don't care." "Rosie, I'm sorry. We should have told you this before." "Rosie, your sister is going to move in today. Come, let's go." "Mom, I don't want to give anything to her. Ruby does not deserve anything." "Rosie, be kind to your sister." That night, Rosie was sitting on her bed looking at pictures of her and her parents, Clan, when Ruby entered the room. Because that's what she wanted. Rosie looked at different pictures taken with her parents. She did not want a random fairy to change her life. Rosie, you all right? Rosie didn't move up or look. Rosie didn't move or look up. Instead, she kept crying. The next morning at breakfast, their parents hoped things would get better between the two sisters, but it didn't. When Ruby said, Rosie, could you please pass the orange juice? Rosie responded, what did you say, stranger? Ruby? I'm sorry, her father said, looking at Ruby. And Rosie, you stay back once you're done with breakfast, her father added, turning towards Rosie. On Monday, Rosie and Ruby went to school. Hey, Ruby, Mrs. Goldberg said. It's me, Rosie. Oh, sorry, Rosie. How are you doing? I'm fine. How's Ruby? Mrs. Goldberg said. Oh, it's Ruby, Rosie whined. Rosie, I don't want you to feel like that. That's what I feel, Mrs. Goldberg. Mrs. Goldberg, said Ruby as she was trying to find Mrs. Goldberg. Ruby, welcome to the class, Mrs. Goldberg said with a smile. Class, we have a new student, Ruby. Please welcome Ruby. Ruby is Rosie's sister. She's not. Rosie, Rachel said. Rosie, you have a twin? That's so cool. Yeah, right. Thanks. When Rosie got home, her parents asked Ruby how school was. Rosie felt like she was replaced and forgotten. Rosie, how was school? Cool for all you care. Excuse me? Rosie's mom said. What? Never mind. That's what I thought. The next day, Rosie went over to Rachel, who was sitting at her desk, looking at pictures of her and her twin on her phone. Hey, Ruby. Nice to meet you. Rachel. I'm Rachel. Rachel, tell me you hate me. I know you'd rather be with the newbie. Rosie? Rachel said shocked. We know that's not fair. Rosie, Rosie cried. Who is she? Who is Rosie? Ruby is Rosie. Rosie's been replaced by Ruby. Rosie, sometimes happens, especially when people can tell you about it. Rachel sniffled. I do not even realize it. It happens to me all the time. Even now. Sometimes when I and my sister just the same, my parents accidentally mess up or do our names. They do? Yes. I know it's annoying, but you have to get used to it. I know, but that doesn't mean Ruby should get all the attention and making me feel gross. Is she? No, but I'm afraid she would. Wouldn't you be if you were me? Yes, Rosie. But think about how Ruby feels, making you, her sister, feel ignored and forgotten. Happy. She feels happy, of course. Rosie, are you sure? I'm sure she feels sad and upset. I'm sure she wants to do over. I think maybe you and Ruby should try this again. She never wanted you to feel replaced. She doesn't want you to feel that way. Really? I think you're right. I'll go talk to him. Rosie walked to where Ruby sat alone, with her head on her desk. As Rosie walked near Ruby, Ruby looked at Rosie as if she was really sorry. Rosie noticed that Ruby was putting her head on her desk and looked like she was about to cry. Seeing her sister like this made Rosie sad. She felt like it was all her fault. As Rosie walked up to Ruby, Ruby sat up straight and smiled at Rosie, which made Rosie realize that Rachel was indeed too. Rosie realized that Ruby never wanted or intended to replace Rosie. Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Rosie. Nice to meet you too. I'm Ruby, Ruby said. But I don't understand why we're doing this. We're sisters. Ruby, I'm sorry. You went off to a great start, and I think it's time we fix that. When the twins got home from school, they both told their parents that they were going to decorate their room together. And once they finished decorating their room, like both of them were happy with it. And it was evenly distributed, making Rosie feel like she was able to express her as well as her twin at the same time. Thank you.
It was the October of 1962 when the resourced and prepared troops from the People's Republic of China entered Indian held territory. President John F. Kennedy ordered an emergency airlift of supplies to the Indian Army, At the same time, he engaged in diplomatic talks that kept the neighboring country, Pakistan, out of the fighting. He indulged India in extensive military aid and was credited as a key figure in diffusing the situation. Hello, I'm Riya Nagar. Today I will be presenting the research I am doing with my mentor Dilira about the factors affecting JFK's foreign policy and dynamic relationship with India. As seen before, US's critical assistance to India in the 1962 Sino-Indian War is one of the many highlights in US-India relations during the Kennedy terms. Other examples of US generosity and creation of cordial relations with India include a hand in the creation of the Tarapur nuclear plant, the establishment of the Peace Corps in India, and the appointment of one of the most brilliant economic minds of the 21st century, John Kenneth Galbraith, as ambassador to India, and a $1 billion aid package. My research, at its core, in its most elemental form, asks and answers the question, why? Why in these years had US expressed preference for India like it never had before and would not in the years to come? What are the factors that shaped the US-India relationship during the Kennedy term? And here is the answer. I hypothesize that John Kenneth Galbraith, the US ambassador to India in 1961 and 1962, the threat of China's sphere of influence and communist nature, JFK's complex and personal relationship with Prime Minister Nehru are all influencing and major factors that shaped the US-India relationship during the Kennedy term. The methodology in this research project focuses on the close reading of three primary sources. Firstly, the autobiographies of US ambassadors to India, primarily John Kenneth Galbraith, the US and Indian newspapers from the 1960s that described the crisis and spoke about it, the official correspondence between the US and Indian heads of state, JFK and Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. Now moving on to the three factors. John Kenneth Galbraith. Why was he a factor? I argue that the US ambassador to India, John Kenneth Galbraith, is a major influencing figure in strengthening the US-Indian relations at the time. It can be seen so many times in his personal diary, The Ambassador's Journal, that his opinion is greatly valued by President Kennedy and that he has a direct ear to the president, a feature which very few ambassadors possess. Before I continue, let me explain to you what the Ambassador's Journal is. The Ambassador's Journal is the primary source for my project. It is a comprehensive record maintained by Galbraith. It is a legendary source that provides a detailed account of bilateral ties. It tells you what it means to be an American diplomat serving overseas in the 60s and provides many instances of Galbraith's influence. These instances, such as the president reading Galbraith's personal letters to him about foreign policy and Galbraith's views on the outgoings of India, reflect Galbraith's personal influence on the president. So, an example of the magnitude of his involvement in US-India relations is his role in getting the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, to visit India in 1962. This was an action, as described by Bruce Riedel in his book JFK's Forgotten Crisis, as the savior of previously strained US-India relations. Moving on to the second factor. I argue that China's sphere of influence, its dealings with the USSR, and overall communist configuration constitute the second factor in shaping US-Indian relations. The explanation of this factor has many layers piled upon each other, right from the Cold War and JFK carrying out the same anti-communist view as his predecessors. Perhaps the easiest way I can explain this and the most representative explanation of US, India, and China dynamics can be stated in the words of President Kennedy himself. India follows a route in keeping with human dignity and individual freedom, with only haphazard assistance from this country. Red China represents the route of regimented controls and ruthless denial of human rights, with considerable aid from the USSR. This must change. Moving on to the third factor. I argue that the complex personal relationship between the two heads of state, JFK and Nehru, are also influencing factors in the US India relations in the early 1960s. My main evidence comes from correspondence between the two during the terms. This correspondence, these letters exchanged between Nehru and Kennedy, especially during the 1962 Sino-Indian War, were hidden from public view for more than 50 years. Their existence has been revealed only recently. Nehru, who was previously known to snub Kennedy and did not take him seriously in their previous meetings, deviates from that and his personal policy of not relying on the United States. He sends a historical letter asking JFK for military aid, to which, as we know, JFK complies. Now that I have given you an overview of these three factors, I'm going to answer a very, very important question, one that's undoubtedly on many of your minds. Why is this relevant? How does my research matter? My research focuses on the nature of US India relations and crisis diplomacy. These are two concepts that are just as important in the present as they were in the past. President Kennedy has undoubtedly been a major shaping factor in US India relations. We've seen that through many instances throughout this presentation. However, the US relationship with India declined in the years after his presidency. I suggest that Kennedy's foreign policy towards India is a framework, it is a blueprint that would be of great use to American presidents in the future and in the present. His crisis diplomacy, especially in the Sino-Indian War, is a crucial example. As to this day, India and China continue to have border disputes. During the latest dispute in 2020, which claimed the lives of many Indian soldiers, JFK's handling of the situation all those years ago came back into focus. His example and diplomacy model was crucial then and will be crucial in the forthcoming conflicts too. My research contributes to setting forth a roadmap for modern cooperation, which would be historic and it would be beneficial for these two great nations. It is important, now more than ever, that these two democracies, with vast promise and vast potential, overcome the hesitations of history. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Richard Lyons, and my paper was on whether upzoning in Minneapolis had a demonstrable effect on residential property value, specifically single-family properties or formerly single-family properties. This is for the Polygems Asynchronous Symposium. So some context, in December 2018, Minneapolis was the first city in the US to introduce a plan that would effectively abolish single-family zoning in its jurisdiction. And what single-family zoning is it essentially restricts what can be built in a certain area to single-family homes. So they allowed up to 4 plexes to be allowed in these places, meaning lots of land could have developments that would house up to 4 families. Again, this made them the first city in the United States to do so. They're not the only city. Places like California have implemented similar plans on a statewide level, but they are the first to have done this, which points to how recent this data is. So the plan they passed, the Minneapolis 2040, went into effect of October of 2020. Even though it was introduced in 2018, it went into effect in October of 2020. That doesn't mean it had no effect before then, but it just went into effect then. The plan is controversial because its proponents would argue that it would increase housing affordability by expanding the supply of housing. Econ 101 would point to this being true, but reality is more complicated. So its critics are concerned that this may not be the case, or that it is the case and it would impact property value negatively and hurt investments into land. So there has been research done to analyze the effects of this plan, or rather what the trends that it has been associated with, and it found that it was associated to it with a 3 to 5% increase in the value of previously single family properties. But it was a preliminary study. It was only done when the plan was in effect for only a few months, certainly not enough time for any developments to have been constructed. And this paper will hopefully seek to improve on that by using the most recent data available, and hopefully seeing longer term trends in the effects of the policy. So in order to do this, we had to find controls, and specifically we chose St. Paul and Milwaukee because they're both cities in the Midwest, and they both have relatively similar populations to Minneapolis. So data from each of these cities was used, assessors data, and we took the medians for these from 2017 to 2022, and I extrapolated from these medians. I was able to find the year-over-year growth rate in the property values, so we could compare Minneapolis to the control cities to hopefully see whether there was a difference and whether that might have been due to the policy. And these were our results. So on the left is a graph of the median values for each year, and we can see that St. Paul grew here moderately, or about as much as the other control, which is Milwaukee, and Minneapolis grew a little bit more than them, which you can see here by the year-over-year growth rate. This is a table of the year-over-year, or a graph rather, and we can see in 2018 that Minneapolis had a higher growth rate than both of them. And in 2019, however, we can see a little bit of an unexpected result. St. Paul grew very, very dramatically, around 46% or 48%, and compared to the rest of them, which did not grow nearly as much, though comparing Minneapolis to the other control, which is Milwaukee, Minneapolis grew more. So for between 2020 and 2021, we can see that Milwaukee lacked the data for 2020, so we couldn't get I couldn't get the year-over-year growth rate for 2020 and 2021 because we simply did not have the data. But by the time we get to 2022, we can see that Minneapolis had a substantially lower growth rate in value than both of these controls, and we will as to whether that answers the question of whether that had we can find a demonstrable effect of that policy, or whether it explains these results. The answer is maybe. The initial rise in value growth might be due to expected returns, and what I mean by that is that the announcement of the policy might have caused an increase in property value because there might have been expected returns from developments. So just the power of suggestion is very powerful in economics, and the announcement of the policy may have caused an increase in property value because people saw it as a potentially profitable investment. They expected the developments to bring them in money, which is why you might have seen an increase relative to the controls, or at least to one of the controls here, because they expected the plan to be profitable in the future, even if it wasn't in effect yet. And the later decline might have been due to an expansion of housing supply, which may have it may have decreased the value of property, or not decreased, but it might have controlled the growth rate of the value of property, which would indicate that housing was possibly made more affordable. But there are lots of limitations to the study. These results aren't necessarily an explanation of what happened, because the nature of the study, it's an observational study. that alone makes it very, very difficult to try and assert any kind of causation. But beyond that, the counterfactuals were imperfect. If we can look back to here, we can see that Minneapolis shoots up very, very high, or St. Paul rather, and this is an issue because it's very, very different from the other controls, which would lend me to believe that it's not a very good counterfactual, or at least not for this year. And Milwaukee as well has issues because it just doesn't have data for 2020. We can see that there's no median assessed value. So these are clearly not perfect counterfactuals. I mean, there's no world where they would be perfect counterfactuals, but these have pretty considerable flaws as counterfactuals. So assessed values, right? So assessed values are not inherently, they're not market values. They're an assessment of market value. So they might not perfectly reflect the market value of single family properties. And also there was COVID, right? Between 2020 and 2021, we can see that growth rates, and at least for the counties where that existed, we can see that the growth rates fell pretty sharply. And this might be due to COVID, which itself is a pretty massive confounding variable because there were lots of policies and changes in economy that happened during then that we just can't really account for in the study. And there's also, like I said, there's a lack of data for Milwaukee, specifically in 2020. We did not have a median value for Milwaukee, but also because we did not know the variance in the data, which might have been important because we might have been able to extrapolate which places were more affected than others within these counties. So that brings us to the conclusion, which is that the results of the study may indicate that the Minneapolis 2040 plan made housing more affordable at the expense of investors, but that this is ultimately just a possible explanation, and that anyone consulting the study for policy should keep that in mind, because it has lots of limitations that are very notable and undermine, or possibly undermine, the accuracy of this interpretation to a significant degree. So thank you. Again, I am.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Yao, and I'll be presenting through the one-sided mirror the effects of commodification on an individual's cultural perception. So globalization is a phenomenon that is greatly increasing the reach of domestic products and services. By extension, such trade is also furthering the reach of the cultures these commodities represent, resulting in increased intercultural interactions. Many countries seize this as a way to promote themselves and improve their reputation to both gain monetary benefit and elevate their global status in a soft power tactic known as country branding. An example of this is the Cool Japan strategy, a plan devised to promote Japanese culture and global presence through increased English education in Japanese schooling and holding international festivals in Japan to attract tourists. Altogether, this can be seen as a plan that aims to form a collective impression of Japan through enforcing changes from individual experiences, whether that is improving the foreign communication skills of Japanese citizens or giving tourists more incentive to visit the country, to elevate collective change. My research delves into the investigation of this individual perspective. How do individuals perceive a culture and its commodities? How is the quality of a cultural good or service evaluated? The concept of authenticity lies at the center of all of these questions. Authenticity is a powerful determinant of consumer preference and aversion, yet what one group perceives as being authentic may not be the same for another. Please take a moment to think about your culture. Describe it to yourself. Now, think about how someone foreign may describe your culture. Will the two be the same? When we travel, we all try to find the most authentic shop or restaurant. However, we are not the only ones thinking about this. If a country is trying to commercialize its culture to outsiders, they are likely to then make targeted marketing choices about deciding what to promote based on consumer demand. Essentially, what aspects of their culture we as outsiders stereotype as being authentic. As a result, there exists a disparity between the foreign marketed representation of a culture and the culture as how it is represented within its community. My research begs the question, how does this disparity, amongst other effects of cultural commodification, affect individuals of that commodified culture? The examination of cultural interactions and the disparity within perceptions will bring a new perspective into discussion of how cultural preservation and identity can be balanced amidst commodification. To construct my propositions, I consulted 3 groups of literatures, the first being the differences in behavior and cognition between individualist and collectivist cultures. Before I begin, I would like to define the term reactance, a key concept within individuals' reactions to the feelings of identity threat cultural commodification may induce. It is formally defined as the motivation to restore a threatened freedom, and we will interpret it in this context as the freedom to represent one's own culture as they see fit due to the aforementioned disparity between an identifier and foreign viewers' perception of a culture. Now, with that established, I shall move on to my propositions, the first being that collectivists are more likely to experience and demonstrate reactance based on the singular commodities assessed threat to their community. Now, this is based on the studies that has demonstrated a selectivity in reactance formulation collectivists tend to have due to their reliance on situational cues for judgment. Their lack of self-consistency makes them unlikely to generalize sentiments and such base their reactance towards cultural commodities on singular cases. Now, for example, if a Japanese company produces kimonos that are rented out to tourists for photo taking, but the design of these kimonos are historically inaccurate as they have been simplified for easier wear, Japanese people, a traditionally collectivist group, will avoid renting this brand of kimonos, even if the same brand has a separate line that is historically accurate. However, this case of perceived threat from commodification does not stop them from engaging with other similar services. If a different company produces accurate kimonos for tourists to rent, Japanese people may be more inclined to continue engaging with that service as they do not find that case of commodification threatening to their identity. Now, the opposite can be said for the individualists, who are more likely to generalize their sentiments across all cases of commodification, meaning that they will hold a positive or negative attitude towards all goods that commodify their culture rather than holding a varying opinions between each. And this is due to the fact that they are proven to have higher self-consistency and being unlikely to change their attitudes once initial sentiments are solidified, as well as being unlikely to be affected by their community and likely to generalize sentiments. Now, moving on to my second literature, it is examining high versus low identifiers, and especially in different levels of identifications, reactions to identity threat, which here I have defined as devaluation and distinctiveness loss. So devaluation is the threat one may feel when their culture is belittled or devalued by commercialization, and distinctiveness loss, the threat one feels in the face of assimilation. To give respective examples, one may feel threatened if a product that's labeled from their culture is being priced less compared to a similar product from a different culture. And someone may also feel threatened if the local language spoken in their hometown was spoken less due to a large influx of foreign tourists. Now, moving on to the propositions, I believe that in response to identity threat through the devaluation of a culture, higher identifiers of that culture will continue affirming their cultural connection across all cognitive and behavioral expressions of the culture. And the studies thus far have confirmed that higher identifiers will have a continued association with their cultural identity, typically through the purchase of market goods. But in my proposition, I want to extend on that by clarifying it will not be only in market consumption, but also lifestyle choices, such as continuing to associating themselves with a culture by speaking the language or preparing the cuisine. Now, moving on to distinctiveness loss, I've proposed that once run by higher identifiers, cultural perceptions will one remain static from their pre-commodification perception, and 2, demonstrate closure towards content they perceive as being part of the post-commodification culture, namely displaying reactance through rejecting what they perceive as being aspects of an invasive culture. So to explain this application, if a country like Singapore receives an increasing Chinese population due to tourism or immigration, what constitutes Singaporean culture will certainly change as more Chinese influence comes in, similar to a culture post-commodification. However, higher identifiers of the original Singaporean culture may still call themselves Singaporean in alignment with their image of that community being defined by the Singapore pre-Chinese influence. However, they will also display closure or rejection by performing traditional Singaporean activities, particularly those that would exclude Chinese immigrants, such as speaking in Singlish rather than standard English, or thereby demonstrating the higher identifier's possibility of remaining a static self-perception. Now, moving on to the third aspect of my propositions, which is the presence of monetary benefit. The first being that the reactants elicited by monetary benefit causes individuals to separate the idea of their own culture from the aspects of their culture that they are exporting to a foreign audience. So this is due to the fact that consumers have been shown to demonstrate reactance that's caused by identity-based marketing, by de-emphasizing their own identity from their self-perception. And now I want to apply this to the producer's perspective, which is something that is visible in the production of the Pokemon anime by the Japanese company. So in their production, you can clearly see the construction of two separate cultural perceptions targeting the in-group, the Japanese people, and the out-group, the foreign audience, by the identifier, aka the Japanese production company, which may explain the differences, such as the level of cultural odor produced in the anime, or the presence of Japanese culture in the anime that's catered towards Japanese audiences being much higher than those catered towards foreign audiences. Because as Pokemon first was released, the anime was only geared or expected to be geared towards Japanese audiences, making Japanese cultural symbols, cultural odor, much more prominent. However, as later seasons began to be globalized to be commodified towards the international audience, the anime itself lost the Japanese emblems, and thus demonstrates that there is a separate perception of Pokemon and their, by extension, Japanese culture occurring through global commodification. Now, additionally, monetary benefit also causes individuals to describe their culture's interactions with another culture with more stereotyping than they would for describing their own in-group perception. And here I would like to define stereotyping as being the identifier stereotype of how they think foreign audiences will want to engage with their own culture. So once again, going back to the example of the Japanese, who are known for being a collectivist culture, they may choose to emphasize individuality or kosei in their travel brochures, as evidenced by the studies presented, under the assumption that they are appealing to tourists from individualist cultures such as England and America, as well as learning English to improve communication, such as in the case of the tourist town Niseko. Now, in addition to looking at each different component of the literatures I have consulted, I have also listed out interactive effects that in the level of individualism of a culture, the level of identification, and the presence of monetary benefit may have with each other. And to begin, I believe that the higher identifiers of a collectivist culture will produce more products that cater to the altered image of a culture post-commodification for monetary benefit. And once again, however, they will continue producing cultural products that are in alignment with, they will produce products in alignment with the post-commodification image, even though they have a pre-commodification perception, i.e. that they will not change their view of their culture, as they tend to have a more situation-based perception of self they are likely to capitalize on that in their reactance to monetary benefit by developing the aforementioned two different views of their culture, and thus produce goods that cater to the outgroup. Now moving on to lower identifiers of collectivist culture, they will alter their perception according to the changes commodification causes, but choose to produce more culturally odorless products instead. And this is also the altering of perception is due to them both being a lower identifier as well as being one of a collectivist culture, both which have more fluid perceptions are more easily influenced by surroundings. And additionally, the choice to produce more culturally odorless products is reasoned from the lower identifier's tendency to be dissociative in the face of identity threat and reactance. Therefore, they are dissociating from their culture in production to produce more goods that contain less cultural emblems. Now, for the higher identifier of individualist cultures, they will display closure or rejection of foreign cultures through the aggressive rejection of commodification if their perception is challenged. And this is because the higher identifiers of individualistic cultures are egocentric and self-consistent. So thereby meaning that they will refuse to alter their own cultural perception based on the surroundings, as well as projecting their own perception onto others by extension rejecting any alternatives. And lastly, the lower identifiers of individualistic cultures will likely display passive avoidant behavior to cultural commodities that challenge their perception. And this is due to the lower identifiers' tendency to dissociate with reactance and with avoidance, as they do not hold as much individuality as the high identifier. Now, moving on, it is important to discuss, it is of practical and theoretical significance to discuss whether this work is applicable to advanced research in cultural interaction and self-perception, particularly in regards to commodification and globalization. Future research may work to verify the framework proposed. New studies can be conducted regarding the relationship between cultural odor and reactance, more concretely between cultural products and cultural schema as to whether identifiers do consider certain cultural products to be part of their culture. And additionally, focusing on self-perception, one can also investigate the process by which cultural products are developed in relation to cultural self-image. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.